I never thought my own parents would try to kill me for money, but as I tumbled down the stairs, I realized some people are only family in name. Stick with me, because this story isn't just about betrayal, it's about how I fought back. I am Tessa Marlowe, 24, and for most of my life, I thought I knew my parents. Richard and Elaine Marlowe, rich, powerful, and always perfectly composed in public. Behind closed doors, they were cold, controlling, and willing to do anything to keep their wealth. I had always been careful, quiet, ambitious in my own way, never asking for more than my share. But that night, everything changed. It started as an ordinary evening at the family mansion. I was passing by the study when I heard them arguing. Their voices were sharp, hushed, but unmistakable. "She can't have it all," my father snapped. "She'll ruin everything if she gets her hands on the trust." My mother's voice was even colder. "We can't let her take what's ours. She's too reckless." My heart sank, and a pit formed in my stomach. I realized this was more than money. They saw me as a threat. I froze for a moment, trying to process what I had just heard. Then, in a move that felt like slow motion, they grabbed me. I remember the push, the sudden loss of balance, the air rushing past my face as I tumbled down the grand staircase. The world blurred in pain, a flash of panic, and then darkness. When I woke in the hospital, every bone and muscle ached. My body hurt, yes, but what hurt more was the betrayal. My parents had tried to end my life because of money. I stared at the sterile white ceiling, rage and disbelief colliding in my chest. Tears came, not just from pain, but from the realization that the people who were supposed to protect me were the ones who wanted me gone. I called the police the moment I could, my voice shaking but determined. I knew this was only the beginning. I promised myself that I wouldn't be their victim, not anymore. Every memory of their whispers, every scar on my body, would fuel my fight. They thought they could break me with a single fall. They didn't know that I was already planning how I would rise, and how I would make them pay. This was the night my life split into two, before the fall and after. And after, I would not just survive. I would fight back. Ever since I can remember, I always felt like I didn't belong in my own family. While my sister got all the attention and praise, I was always the quiet one, the afterthought. My parents, Richard and Elaine Marlowe, never hid their disappointment in me, but it was always wrapped in fake smiles and polite words. Little things, passing comments, cold looks, being left out of family decisions, added up over the years. I thought it was normal until that night on the stairs. As I lay in the hospital, I couldn't stop thinking about all the small ways they had pushed me down before emotionally. They would criticize me in front of others, dismiss my achievements, and make me doubt myself. Every time I tried to speak up, they would twist my words or laugh it off. Looking back now, I see how carefully they had trained me to feel powerless. It wasn't just money they wanted to control. It was me. The police investigation started quickly after I called. At first, my parents acted shocked and worried, but I could see through it. They claimed I had tripped, that it was a terrible accident. The officers asked questions, and I gave them my side, showing bruises and recounting what had happened. My parents insisted nothing was wrong, but the more I spoke, the more I realized just how cold and calculated they were. Then came the discovery that shattered what little trust one had left. Hidden emails, documents, and messages between them revealed the truth. They had planned the fall. They were terrified I would claim my inheritance, and they wanted to make sure I never did. It was all there in writing. Their worry about me ruining everything, and instructions to make sure I couldn't walk away with what was mine. My chest burned with anger and heartbreak. The people who were supposed to love me, guide me, and protect me had instead tried to erase me. I wanted to scream, cry, and run all at once. I felt the sting of betrayal so deep that it left me shaking. How could my own parents plan something so cruel? But under that shock, a small flame of determination started. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I knew the fight ahead would be hard, but I also knew I deserved justice. Every memory of their lies, manipulation, and coldness would fuel me. They had tried to destroy me, but they didn't know I was only just beginning to fight back. After discovering the truth about my parents, I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't let Richard and Elaine Marlowe slip away with their lies. I started writing everything down. Every phone call, every suspicious conversation, every past threat they had made. I went through old documents looking for contracts, bank statements, anything that could prove their plans to steal my inheritance. Every little detail mattered, and I didn't want to leave a single thing to chance. That's when Detective Evan Calloway entered my life. He was in his mid-30s, sharp and serious, and at first he didn't believe me. He thought maybe I was exaggerating, that families sometimes fight over money. But as I showed him the records, the emails, and the old notes my parents had left lying around, I could see the change in his eyes. Slowly, he began to understand that I wasn't making things up. He became a quiet ally, giving me advice and listening when I needed to talk, without judging me. Meanwhile, my parents had started their usual tricks. They would act so kind and concerned in front of others, visiting me in the hospital or calling to check on me, smiling and asking how I was feeling. But I knew better. Behind closed doors, they whispered to lawyers, made secret phone calls, and tried to manipulate people around me. I could feel the gaslighting, the way they tried to make me doubt myself, make me question whether I was overreacting. It was exhausting, and some days I almost let myself believe them. But I couldn't. I had too much at stake. I had to push through the fear that gripped me every time I saw them or thought about what they were capable of. My body still ached from the fall, and my mind constantly replayed their betrayal. But with every document I found and every conversation I documented, I felt a little stronger. My determination grew with every piece of evidence I collected. I knew this was just the beginning. I was laying the groundwork for something bigger, something that would make them regret underestimating me. Fear was always there, whispering that I couldn't do it, but determination was louder. I reminded myself that I wasn't powerless. I had the truth on my side, and that truth would be my weapon. Step by step, I was building the case that would bring justice, and finally, make them face the consequences of everything they had done. I realized that waiting for justice to come on its own wouldn't be enough. I had to act, but I couldn't rush or make mistakes. Every move needed to be quiet, careful, and calculated. I started by looking at my parents' business dealings, reviewing documents I had collected, and finding small ways to expose their missteps without revealing myself. Little things at first, nothing that could be traced back to me. One night, I sent an anonymous email to one of their business partners, pointing out some suspicious practices and warning them to double-check the paperwork. I didn't sign my name or leave a clue. A few days later, I heard through the grapevine that the partner had started asking questions, quietly investigating and growing concerned. It was a small victory, but it gave me hope. I realized that even small actions could chip away at their control if done correctly. Elaine began to sense that something was wrong. She was always careful and composed, but now I noticed her pacing more, making phone calls with a tense voice and asking questions that didn't make sense. She didn't know who was behind the disruptions, but she could feel that someone was sabotaging them. I watched her from a distance, carefully keeping my identity hidden, and felt a rush of empowerment. For the first time, I wasn't just a victim. I was someone they had to fear, even if they didn't know it yet. I had to be careful, though. Every message, every tip had to be untraceable. I couldn't let a single slip reveal that it was me. I spent hours thinking ahead, planning, imagining how they might respond, and how to stay one step ahead. The fear of being discovered was always there, but it was outweighed by the satisfaction of finally taking control, even in small ways. With each small strike, I felt my confidence grow. I realized I wasn't powerless anymore. My parents had tried to break me, but I was finding a way to fight back without being reckless. Every move I made was a reminder that I wasn't someone they could push around or manipulate. The path ahead was long, but this first strike proved that I could fight in my own way, carefully, smartly, and relentlessly. I was no longer just surviving. I was starting to take back what was mine. As I dug deeper into my parents' past, I started to see a pattern I hadn't noticed before. Richard and Elaine Marlowe weren't just controlling with me. They had a long history of greed and manipulation. I discovered letters, old bank statements, and family records showing how they had cheated relatives, lied about inheritances, and covered up financial mistakes to protect themselves. It was shocking to realize this wasn't just about me. It was how they had always operated, and I had been blind to it for too long. While going through some old files in the safe, I stumbled across something I wasn't supposed to see, a hidden trust fund in my name that they thought I had no idea about. It had been quietly set up by my grandfather, meant for me all along, but my parents had tried to erase it from my life. Holding that paper in my hands, I felt a mix of relief and anger. They had underestimated me, thinking I would never find it. Now, I had proof of what was legally mine, and I knew I could fight to claim it. At the same time, a heavy tension built inside me. I wanted to confront them, to show them that I knew everything, that their lies and schemes weren't hidden from me anymore. But I also knew that revealing too much too soon could ruin my chances of taking back what was mine. I had to stay patient, careful, and strategic. Every conversation, every gesture had to be measured, so they wouldn't suspect that I was aware of their secrets. I spent hours planning, imagining the legal steps I would need to take, thinking about how to reclaim my inheritance without giving them a hint. I researched laws, drafted notes, and made lists of everything I needed to secure my claim. The more I learned, the more empowered I felt, but also more conflicted. Part of me wanted to confront them head-on, to make them feel the shock I felt when I discovered their betrayal. Another part of me reminded me that patience and strategy would give me a stronger victory. That night, as I sat surrounded by papers and notes, I realized something important. Knowledge was power. I had the tools to take back what was rightfully mine, and I would do it. But I also understood the stakes. One wrong move, and I could lose everything. I had to be smart, careful, and relentless. The game had changed, and now I was in control, even if they didn't know it yet. I knew my parents wouldn't give up easily, but I didn't realize just how far they would go. Soon after I discovered the trust fund, I noticed strange things happening. Cars parked near my apartment, unfamiliar faces following me, and phone calls that went unanswered. It didn't take long to realize that Richard and Elaine had hired a private investigator to watch my every move. They wanted to know what I was doing, who I was talking to, and how close I was to exposing them. The trap started soon after. One day, a business associate called me with a story that made it sound like I was trying to manipulate evidence. Another time, a neighbor mentioned seeing me acting suspicious, near the mansion, even though I had been nowhere near it. It felt like they were trying to make me doubt myself, to shake my confidence and stop me from taking action. They wanted me to look guilty, weak, and unstable. Every step I took had to be careful, or their lies could trap me. Through it all, Detective Evan Calloway stayed quietly in the background. He gave me subtle advice, warning me about risks I might not see and suggesting ways to stay ahead of my parents. Sometimes he just listened, letting me vent my anger and fear. Other times he gave me small tips that made a huge difference. How to document evidence safely, how to avoid leaving traces, how to stay calm when provoked. I started realizing that having someone on my side, someone who truly believed me, was more powerful than I had imagined. Despite the danger and constant tension, I started gaining confidence. Each close call I survived made me stronger and more determined. I learned to read my parents' moves, to anticipate their schemes, and to act quietly but decisively. Every time I avoided one of their traps, it felt like a small victory, proof that I could outsmart them. The suspense became part of my daily life, but instead of paralyzing me, it fueled me. I knew they were watching, but I was no longer afraid of them. I was learning their weaknesses, testing their reactions, and quietly preparing my next moves. The closer I got to exacting revenge, the more I understood. Fear could be turned into power, and patience was my greatest weapon. The fall they had planned would never define me. Soon, I would make sure they understood that I was the one in control. I knew the time had come to confront my parents, but I had to be smart. I arranged a private meeting, making it seem like I wanted to talk things through, like I was ready to forgive and move on. I could see the relief on their faces when I suggested it, completely unaware that I already held the upper hand. They thought I was still fragile, still the scared girl they had pushed around for years. As we sat in the mansion study, I took a deep breath and kept my voice steady. I started talking calmly, carefully choosing my words. I told them I knew everything, the years of manipulation, the lies, the emotional abuse, and the fall down the stairs. I spoke about their attempts to cheat me out of my inheritance and the hidden trust fund they thought I didn't know about. I watched as their smiles faltered, eyes narrowing, realizing I was no longer a helpless target. They tried to intimidate me. Richard leaned forward, voice low and threatening, trying to make me doubt myself. Elaine's eyes flashed with anger, warning me not to step out of line. But I stayed calm, composed, and quiet. I didn't yell or cry. I didn't let them see that their words had any effect on me. The girl they had tried to crush was gone. In her place was someone who had survived, who had collected proof, and who knew how to fight back. I didn't need to reveal everything, just enough to shake them. I hinted that evidence of their crimes had already been given to the authorities. I watched their faces tighten, the tension rising, as they realized that their control over me and their empire wasn't as secure as they thought. For the first time, I felt the rush of power that comes from holding the truth, from knowing that I could defend myself and make them face the consequences. The meeting ended with no dramatic shouting or threats. I left the room quietly, knowing that this confrontation had already won me a small but meaningful victory. They didn't know exactly what I had done, but they could feel the shift. I wasn't the powerless girl they had always treated with contempt. I was stronger, smarter, and ready to see this fight through. That day, I realized the most effective revenge wasn't about yelling or showing anger. It was about staying calm, keeping control, and letting the truth speak for itself. After the confrontation, I knew I had to keep pressing forward, but carefully. My parents had always relied on their allies, friends, business partners, and lawyers to protect them. If I could shake their support, I could weaken them without exposing myself too soon. I started dropping small hints, carefully anonymous tips, and questions that planted doubt about their honesty and loyalty. It didn't take long before suspicions began spreading. One by one, I watched their allies pull away. Meetings were canceled, deals delayed, and whispers of mistrust traveled quickly through their business circles. Richard and Elaine couldn't understand what was happening. They tried to cover it up, blaming competitors or imaginary mistakes, but the cracks were already there. I didn't need to speak to anyone directly. The fear of exposure and the hints I had placed were enough to make them panic. Watching them scramble to control a situation they no longer controlled was both terrifying and satisfying. As their reputation started crumbling, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was thrilled to see them finally shaken, finally realizing that I wasn't someone they could push around. Every hurried call they made, every frantic meeting I overheard, reminded me that the tables had turned. I was no longer the powerless daughter they had tried to destroy. I had become the quiet force they underestimated. At the same time, I felt a subtle struggle within myself. I had revenge in my hands, and it was easy to get swept up in anger, to enjoy seeing them suffer. But I remembered the person I wanted to be, the person I was fighting for. I didn't want to become cruel like them, letting my actions be driven purely by spite. Instead, I focused on strategy, on fairness, and on reclaiming what was mine without losing myself in hatred. I realized that power could be quiet. It didn't have to be loud or dramatic. The leaks, the doubt, the shift in alliances, they were enough to make my parents falter. I watched from a distance as Richard and Elaine grew frantic, trying to patch their crumbling world. It was the first time I felt fully in control, the first time I understood what it meant to fight back wisely. They had underestimated me, and now they were paying the price, not with threats or anger, but with careful, calculated moves I had orchestrated. For the first time, I felt a calm confidence. I was no longer their victim. I was the one shaping the story now, and I wasn't about to let fear or cruelty control me. The day the police arrived at the Marlowe estate, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and calm. Everything I had done, the documents I collected, the careful notes, the evidence I had passed to Detective Evan, was about to make a real difference. I stayed back, letting the authorities move in, watching as officers quietly went through the rooms, carefully securing everything they needed. I saw my parents, Richard and Elaine, finally confronted with the consequences of their actions. They tried to argue, to pretend it was a misunderstanding, but the evidence spoke louder than their lies. Within hours, they were handcuffed, led away from the mansion they had ruled with arrogance and fear. They looked at me with disbelief, rage, and maybe a hint of fear, but I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say to them. Their power over me was gone. Walking through the now empty mansion afterward, I felt the weight of what had happened. The silence was heavy, echoing through rooms that had once been full of manipulation and control. It was bittersweet. I had won. I had survived, reclaimed my inheritance, and brought them to justice. But the cost was high. The family I had hoped to trust was gone, replaced by a harsh reality I had to accept. I realized that some wounds don't heal and some relationships can't be fixed, no matter the victories outside the walls of the home. Yet, in that silence, I also felt something stronger, my own strength. Every step I took through the empty halls reminded me that I had endured their cruelty, outsmarted them, and stayed true to myself. The fear that had once held me back was replaced by a quiet confidence. I knew now that I could survive betrayal, face danger, and still find my footing. Detective Evan had been right by my side throughout the process, never pushing too hard, never stepping over the line. I felt gratitude for his steady support, a reminder that while family can fail you, there are people in the world who can be trusted, who can help you see justice through. As I stood on the balcony overlooking the estate's grounds, I realized that victory wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about truth, courage, and survival. My parents' reign of control had ended, and I was free. I had survived the fall, the lies, and the betrayals, and now I could finally move forward, carrying both the scars and the strength they had given me. After everything that happened, I knew I couldn't just go back to the life I had before. The Marlowe estate, my parents, and all their lies were behind me. I decided to use my inheritance to start fresh, to build a life where I wasn't controlled or manipulated. One of my first steps was creating a foundation for young women, helping them gain independence, confidence, and the tools to protect themselves. I wanted to turn my pain into something meaningful, to make sure no one else would feel as powerless as I once did. Moving into my own apartment, I slowly filled it with things that reminded me of who I truly was. The walls no longer felt like cages. They felt like a blank canvas for my new life. I started working with young women, teaching them about financial independence and self-confidence, sharing lessons I had learned the hard way. Every success story reminded me why I had fought so hard. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about creating a better future for myself and for others. One afternoon, I returned to the mansion, not to go back to my old life, but to face it on my own terms. I walked to the grand staircase where my parents had tried to end me, where my life had changed forever. I ran my hand along the banister, feeling the smooth wood beneath my fingers. For the first time, I didn't feel fear. Instead, I felt a strange sense of closure. That staircase no longer held power over me. I had survived it, and now I reclaimed it not with anger, but with strength. Detective Evans stopped by to check on me that day. He smiled gently, hinting at a friendship that could grow without lies or betrayal. There was a sense of hope in that connection, a reminder that not all relationships end in hurt, that trust could be rebuilt with the right people. I felt a small but important comfort knowing that while my family had failed me, the world still held people I could count on. Standing there, looking at the staircase and then at the city beyond the mansion, I felt the tension between my pain and empowerment. The scars would always be part of me, reminders of the fall and betrayal I survived. But the revenge was complete, and more importantly, I had built something new. I was free, stronger, and ready to live a life on my own terms, carrying both the memory of the past and the power of my own resilience. If you've ever faced betrayal or felt powerless, remember that knowledge and careful planning can protect your rights. Learn to document evidence, understand your legal options, and seek trustworthy support. Stand strong, reclaim control of your life, and turn challenges into opportunities for growth and empowerment.